Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Cool. So this PowerPoint slides that you're seeing here consist of almost 100 different slides. And usually I'll use this PowerPoint over a course of 3 days. But since it'll be only 2 hours today and it will be a 2 weekly thing, so basically once every 2 weeks I'll have the same meeting just to catch up with everyone. So this will be a basic level introduction to DXP. So next 2 weeks, basically, for example, it will be exactly the same thing, or it will just be edited or slightly changed based on this meeting. But yeah, if you are completely new to it, this will be great. If you are already knowledgeable on certain areas, feel free to continue or feel free to drop off whenever you want. Okay, so starting with the introduction. Okay, so that should be fine to view. Cool. So what is Journey Creator? So Journey Creator is a bespoke design tool from Honeybee, now with Synchronous, which can be used to create your very own end-to-end customer or business-to-business journeys. As a web interface, its capabilities include implementing complex business logic, which you will eventually review, test, and publish all in one convenient location from anywhere. So in other words, you can access Beekeeper, or you can call it Journey Creator from your mobile phone, iPad, or any web client. By the end of these sessions, you should have been given an in-depth overview on the three main areas, which will be App Builder, Data Editor, and the Integrate sections. You should have been able to create a fully fledged journey on Journey Creator and explored how well, you can say complex, but generally business logic can be used to integrate to your workflow. The most interesting part of these 2 hours, if we get to the point, will be integrating with a third-party API. And I've chosen a popular weather API, which is free to use and very easy to understand. Of course, Journey Creator is only one area of DXP. So you guys may have heard of Nectar and how it integrates with Journey Creator. So I doubt we'll get to that point today because there is a lot of content to go through, as you've probably seen. But yeah, you will eventually understand how Journey Creator will fit within the rest of the platform. Ignoring testing, you would have previewed and published your end-to-end journey right at the end, just to confirm that you have a basic understanding of how to use it. Now, again, this PowerPoint is based on a classroom exercise, so it's with the audience of assuming that you have access to Journey Creator yourselves, which you do. Normally, I'll split these exercises, as in these 3 exercises that you're seeing on the board. Yeah, so normally I'll have 5 groups. If there are 25 people in the room, I'll split into 5 different groups because of something called App Engines, which is basically, well, App Engine itself is the runtime environment for Journey Creator. And in order for you to, how can I say it, or the easiest way to preview different applications at the same time is to use multiple different App Engine IDs. For example, we have an environment called QA, and this is what we'll be using today. Everyone can also access it, but there may be issues with previewing, depending on how many people are on the call. So normally I'll have a whiteboard and I'll assign at least 5 people to one App Engine ID, and then there'll be around a table, and then at least one person in that group will preview. But for today, it'll be a lot easier if you just follow along. You can preview, but there may be errors, so just a warning in advance. Okay, great. So as you can see here, we are inside the environment, but actually I'm going to start from the beginning.
Okay, can you
share the screen?
Yeah, because, yeah.
Oh, you want to see it on the screen? Okay.
No, that's right. I can't.
Sure.
Business, Skype business.
We on Zoom. Oh, sorry, I haven't given you the link, have I? Sorry.
No.
Sorry, guys, just give me 1 minute. Sorry. What's your ad? Yeah. Zoom is. Yeah, I was gonna place it on the screen, but there's issues with resolution, so I don't want to play with that now. But yeah, sorry. So anyone that doesn't have the link, or anyone that may be interested in joining, please feel free to forward the link to that individual or group. But anyway, so we are based on the QA environment. And just for the rest of the meeting, please follow along, as in you can also access it. But, sorry?
Have to install some first.
Okay, sorry. But yeah, please follow along, and then any questions, feel free to send them my way. Cool. So imagine you're completely new to DXP, and you're, as a client, you've recently purchased the software, and you're interested in accessing DXP or Journey Creator. The first thing that you'll see is the login page. Now, usually, you can probably guess these logins because at the moment, security is based on testing. So, for example, as you can see there, you got user 2. Usually, the password will be exactly the same. So, I'm assuming everyone can log in with this with these credentials. So, just a note: please don't log in with user 2 at the moment, because if I preview, and I will explain what preview is, but if I preview and someone else is if someone else previews, our applications will clash, and it will be a bit awkward during the demo. So as for now, please just follow along.
Yeah, because only the app engine can only run
one application at a time. Yeah, but yeah, I'll explain all what preview is and the rest is in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So in order for you to log in, you will need a username and password. So I'm going to log in with user 2. Okay, so the first thing that you'll see is App Builder, which is the main area where you will use to build your application. So I'll start by describing what you'll see in here. So on the left-hand side, you have your directory. So in your directory, you have your projects. So projects basically house your applications. And then inside your applications, you have your features and steps and the rest. But I'll go into what exactly they mean. On the left-hand side, we have our applications. So whenever you create a new application in Journey Creator, and an application, for example, is basically a subject of what you want to create inside Journey Creator. Applications will house your business features, and business features will house your steps. On the PowerPoint, which I'll send to you after this meeting, we have a very interesting diagram that will help you help you see exactly what I mean. But here's a preview. So we have a project that's in the top level. Then inside the project, we have application. We can have multiple applications inside a project. And inside our application, we have our business features. And then your business features can be broken down into steps. As a summary, this is how a project will look inside Journey Creator. So very simple. Now, the question is, how do you actually create a project? Before I do that, one thing you can see on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen is a plus button. And then once you hover over it, you will see a indicator telling you to add an application. So very simple, you give it a name and then your application is created. Now, I'm not going to do that now since I start from the top level. So I'll switch to how to create a new project. Now, it's not very obvious. You may need to go into another screen, but in order for you to create a new project, you will need to visit the top level navigation, and then you'll see the spanner and the screwdriver icon. Inside there, by default, you'll be located on the data section. So in order for you to create a new project, you probably guessed it, you click on projects, and then and this will be a common theme throughout Journey Creator. there'll be usually a button allowing you to create something, edit something, or delete something. So I want to create a new project called internal training. Now, another common theme in Journey Creator is an option for you to give a new entry, a description as well. But for a project, you can also give it an image, which is optional. But to make it easier for another user of the application, I'm going to give it an image now. And usually I just use a synchronous logo, which is somewhere here. Let's search it. Okay, great. Cool. So I'm not going to give it a description for now, but I've given it a name which is required. So once I hit save, automatically it doesn't load. So you may need to refresh your browser, but usually it will be added to the far right-hand side of your project carousel. So what you need to do to view your new project is click the right-hand arrow, and then you'll be on your project. Okay, great. So luckily, whenever you create a new project, the first prompts that you'll see is use a button, as in the plus button below, to create a new application. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. And just as reference, if I go back to where I was before, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have almost 10 applications here. And then these applications were used for previous training meetings. But cool. So I'm going to create a new application now, and I'll call it weather, since we'll be eventually using the weather application to return information based on the location. And by doing that, we have successfully created a basic application in Journey Creator. So to make it easy, I'll just call it weather. And then we hit save. And then as you can see, our screen goes from completely blank to almost blank. So literally there's nothing here at the moment. So let me switch back to the PowerPoint. So we've basically created a project, which is great. And then inside our project, our applications are hosted, which is even better. And I've just created an application. So the next thing that we do need to create is a business feature. So what are business features? So inside this PowerPoint, which I should have messaged you guys earlier with, what we have here is a glossary, and it just gives a general description to the main terms used throughout Beekeeper or Journey Creator. And if I zoom in, oops, I'm zooming out, weird. Okay, yeah, so business feature is basically a reusable unit of business functionality that either represents a standalone business activity, for example, send location or week weather, or a combination of different business functionalities to represent a customer journey. So that's exactly what a business feature is. Another way of seeing a business feature is a way of breaking down your application. So let me switch back to the diagram. Oh, so yeah, blank screen, nothing added. So the first thing that we do need to add is a business feature. Now, our goal here is to create our own application, which is a weather application, which will send information to an API. And if you don't know what an API is, it's basically short for application programming interface, I think. So I'll show you an example of what so just give me a minute if this will work. Okay, great. Cool, so we will eventually be using the Open Weather Map API. And you can imagine an API as a handshake. So we submit the hand, and then it just shakes the hand back, and it returns information based on the weather. As you can see here, we have different options of what we want to return. And we can view that by clicking on the API link. Eventually, we will be calling information based on a city location. And we'll be returning the data in 2 different units, because we obviously have 2 different systems for returning data, as in weather data. So we will eventually give it the option to return data in a metric format or an imperial format. But yeah, so this is what we'll be using, and I'll show you a quick example of what happens if we specify our current location. Let's see, where is it? Okay, great. So I'm based in London. A quick lesson. So on the top, what we have here is our URL, and to break it apart, after the question mark, we have a query. So basically, eventually, we need to specify our location, which is the query, and then we need to authenticate ourselves with the API for security. And then once we do that, we will have information returned based on our location. So it was London. Currently in London, it is, where is it? All right, so as you can see here, it's been returned in an imperial format. So I can also specify, if this works, metric. Okay, I got an error, which is a mistake. So actually what I'll show you is the final result in Journey Creator. So not cheating, but it'll be a lot easier if I show you through here. So previously I've created a web application with 3 different features. So ignore what you're seeing here. This is basically an application flow, but we'll get back into that later on. But what I'm going to do now is something called preview. And previewing is basically showing you an example of how your application will look once it's eventually finished. And we can preview in Journey Creator. Cool, so once I hit preview, the first thing that you will see is our features. Now, in our current application, we haven't created anything yet, but 1, 2, and 3 is basically our features inside our application called Weather App Updated. And eventually what we will do is we will select our feature, and then you'll see a step called Lookup Weather, which we'll eventually create. And then it's asking for 3 different parameters or properties. The first one is the app ID, which is obviously for authenticating ourselves as a user of the API. So I already have a predefined value. And then we have an option to return the data in metric or imperial. Since we're based in London, and I prefer metric, I'm going to choose metric. And we can also specify a location. Now, I'm not going to specify London. I'm going to try something different here. So we have members on the call in Sophia, so I can specify Sophia. And then we can see eventually the current weather in Sophia.
Miserable.
Miserable. Oh, okay. So what we have here is an error. Okay. So yeah, one thing I will note before I continue is that whenever you see an error, I can say probably 70% of them can be solved with a reset, a journey reset. So as you can see there, if I do it again, submit. Okay, that's a lie. All right, so I need to diagnose that error. But normally, that's the reason why, because I'm not using the correct workstream. Now, again, you may be seeing different errors such as workstreams and preview and everything else, but I will get into that. But I'm just showing you the end result now. So if I preview again, okay, this is more like it. Do Sophia. All right, so for example, again, if you receive an error, such as this straight away after you've selected preview.
Is that engine used?
Yes, or something isn't ready available. So if you give it a few seconds, I don't know why, but if you give it a few seconds, the preview environment needs to run, or how can I say it? The preview environment needs to be ready before you can actually view your preview. So all you need to do is just reset your journey and then try again. So let me do it properly actually. So we have our features, then we have our step, and then we have our first property, which is our app ID. We can choose between metric and imperial, and there's a way to do that. And then we can specify our location. So once we hit submit, no error, which is great. And then we have a response. Now, to make it very easy for you, in order for you to see the response, what you will eventually do is select the state. And this is basically the current state, as in your current journey, and all the information related towards that journey. If I scroll down, we have a object called response, and then we obviously have to create this object in the application, but we'll do this later. But the most important thing is that we can see that, okay, I've chosen Imperial. Let me choose metric. I'm not good with Imperial. Okay, much better. So we can see that the humidity in Sofia, as in Bulgaria at the moment, is 93%. And we also returned 2 different timestamps, which is basically the sunrise and the sunset of today in Sofia. But as mentioned earlier on the call, it's quite miserable because it is basically 2 degrees at the moment. I think London's colder or slightly warmer anyway, but yeah, it's winter. So yeah, it's quite miserable at the moment, but this is basically the end as well. Cool. Any questions so far? No? Okay, cool. All right, so going back to where we were, not to confuse. So we visit our carousel, so we scroll all the way to the right to see our new project. And then we have our first application. So in order for you to create your first feature, what you need to do is when you hover your cursor over your application, you'll see 3 dots. Once you click on those dots, you have an option to add your new feature. So we'll call this feature lookup weather. So weather lookup, which is basically a business feature that could be implemented in a journey inside a store or online, depending on the situation. But yeah, so all you need to do is give it a name and then you save. Now, again, once you do that, it's pretty blank because we need to add some sort of, or we need to basically break down our feature. So we can add steps, which is basically another way of defining our journey. So we've added our application feature, and the second thing we need to do now is define our first step. So I'm going to call the step lookup weather. But before I save, as you can see here, we have another option to give it a template. Now in version 4.1, and again, I may refer to previous versions of Journey Creator because there are a few changes which are important. So in version 4.1 of Journey Creator, there has been an option to implement a Lumen client where you can select templates and assign them to your steps. So you can also configure your steps as in how it will look on the front end. And this is basically how a client can use Journey Creator to build a front-end example of a journey as well. Of course, this is all depending on what the client wants, but we'll get back into templates later because it's a bit more intermediate advanced. But for now, I'm actually going to select no template. Actually, let's see. Okay, great. Now I don't need to do that. I'm actually going to show you, I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to show you how it will look on the front end. So just a quick note as well. I wouldn't worry too much about how it is configured between the front end, as in between here and between Beekeeper for now, but all you need to know is that they do interlink with each other in a certain way, which I will not get into now. But yeah, that's for, it's not for now. So I'll actually give it a template and I'll give it a simple form template. Now, out of the box, you have 2 templates in Journey Creator where you can assign to your steps. The first one is called Simple Form, which allows you to specify a title, a subtitle, and your submit button. So an example of that will be Weather Lookup, which is your title. And you can tell it's a title because it's a larger header or heading, which is basically H1. And then, and that's for people that are technical when it comes to front-end development. And also we have a subheading or a subtitle, which we can also define or configure, which is the right term actually, inside your step. Then we have our fields, which is of course defined on our step. And then one thing which is also configurable will be our submit button. So this is the first step. So we can also call it next or continue rather than just submit. So cool. So I'm gonna give it a template for now, and I'll resume with that template later on. Cool. All right, so the first thing that you'll see once you create your first step will be more information, which is great. On the right-hand side, we can see what step is currently selected. On the left-hand side, we can also see the name of the step. Now, one thing that most people don't realize in Journey Creator is that you can also give it a note, which is a user note. So you can give it a comment, especially since Journey Creator is a collaborative tool, or will be a bit more collaborative in the future. In case you want to give a note to another user on what functionality needs to be added or any additional notes on the step, you can also define that note by clicking on this icon next to the name of the step. So I can just give it anything, and then once I hit submit, we can add another one. But yeah, cool. But that's not really important now. The most important thing is that we have a blank step. Now, what I've just done now is expanded the 3 different options that we have while configuring a step. The first one will be the data profile, and it's very blank now because we haven't actually added any data, which makes sense. The second one will be integrations and rules, because we eventually need to add something called links to our step. And I'll get into what links is later on. And also the third thing, or the third area, will be the configuration of your UX template. So, I mean, I can configure the template now, but we do need to configure other areas first for us to see it. But you can imagine the title, submit label, and the subtitle being the configuration here as a title, the subtitle, and your submit label. Cool. Now, the only thing that is missing for the step will be these 3 fields. And in order for us to do that, I'm going to take you to another area inside Journey Creator called Data Editor. Now, for those that are not technical, you may be looking at some of these terms, for example, an object and an array, a property, and wondering what the hell is going on here. To make it very easy for you, I'll start from the left to the right. So the first thing that you'll see once you click on Data Editor is called the ADM, which is the Application Data Model. And basically, the best way to see this is as your complete model, as in your complete amount of data for your application. Whenever you add data, as in well, technically you're not adding data because you're referencing data in this model. But whenever you add to the model, you'll see a visual representation of that. And for example, I'm going to add a property now. And a property is basically what it says, a property on your model. But yeah, before I actually save it, I'm going to start from the beginning. So what we have here is show linked. Now, ignore this for now. I have a reason for saying that. Import, ignore this for now. I also have a reason for saying that. But the most important 3 options here will be object, array, and property. We also have a search bar where we can search if our model is quite large. So the way to see an object is a folder for organizing your properties or other objects or arrays. The way to see arrays, as in if you're not really that technical, if you are technical, they work exactly the same way as if they were working in a JSON model. But yeah, the description is very similar. So an array basically associates data of a similar type, and property is an element on your object, for example. But yeah, to make it easy, I'm actually going to show you how to create your first property. Cool. So eventually, just to recap, so what we'll be doing now is sending our location to the API, and then we'll have data returned. So you can probably guess it. The first property that we need to name is our location. So we can give it a name called my location, and there's no spaces involved, otherwise you may get an error. And also I think it needs to be a minimum of 5 characters, which may change in the near future. But yeah, the most important thing here is giving it a name. And before I move lower, we have 4 different tabs here for configuration. So the first one will be properties, where we have our name, an optional description, and our type. Now so not to compare between different versions, but prior to version 4.1, we had 4 main types, and they are still relevant now. So we have a Boolean, and if you don't know what a Boolean is, it's basically true or false. So we can say if a property, as in the value on that property, is true or false, or has to be true or false. A string, which is basically alphanumerical characters. So your string can contain anything between spaces 0 to 9 and A to Z, capital, non-capital, and special characters. But it cannot contain anything else, which kind of sounds weird because you're given the option for you to add anything here. But yeah, there's a reason for calling it a string. We also have a number. So we can only specify numbers in this property. And we basically give it a rule to say that if So numbers will be basically saying if you specify anything apart from a number, then you will get an error. And integers is basically plus or minus, so negative and positive. But yeah, we also have 3 different options here. Base64 is a way of encoding data. A quick example of base64 could be encoding an image. So if you were to break down an image, as in a JPEG, you can break it down into base64. Don't know if that's fully correct, but that's a decent way of explaining it. And the final 2 will be text and image. And this will eventually be connected to a CMS, as in a content management system, where we can reference a text file or an image from the CMS using data editor. But for now, I'm going to give this location, as in my location, the type of a string, because we're adding letters and characters. Okay, now to move on, we have privacy. So privacy, we only have 2 options here. We have public and we have confidential. Now, public will be default, as in anyone can see it. Confidential, you can have an option to add a mask. So for example, whenever you log into Google or Facebook or YouTube and then you reset your password, and for security purposes, they mask the first 4 characters of your email address with asterisks. That's exactly what you can do here. So you have an option to choose between masking a certain amount of characters. Now, in the past, the question has arose on can we add our own custom masks? At the moment, no, not through the Journey Creator, but eventually there may be an option for you to do that. But anyway, so that's the second tab. The third tab will be tags, and that's how we integrate.
So could you just go back to the mask?
Sure.
So we mask just the name of the property or the model we are creating? Or
we mask the value.
The value?
Yeah, of the property.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and the third tab will be formats and tags. So a basic summary will be basically how we connect to the front end. In a future version, this may be slightly different. It's called UI hints, and it will be accessible through somewhere else. But basically, formats and tags will give hints to the UI, as in the front end element, on how to render a certain field in a certain way. And the fourth and the final section here will be validation. Now, personally, the list option should be in a different tab because it's not really validation. But the most important two here will be character length, which is a very popular form of validation where you can specify the minimum amount of characters required for this property and also the maximum. And also we have regular expression. So another name for that would be regex. And if you're not familiar with that, it's basically giving patterns towards your property. And if your pattern doesn't match, then your property is not valid. So your value is not valid. And as you can see here, these are different examples. We can give a regex for an email address, as in it needs to have an @ sign, for example, or we can give it for the date of birth, as in it needs to follow in a certain format. So this is very custom, which is great. And thankfully, we have the option to add more patterns inside Journey Creator. And I'll show you how to do that later on. You can also do it through here, as in create new, and then you can just give it a pattern. But yeah, so basically, well, there's a new tab now, but yeah, there are 4 main areas or 4 main tabs inside your property configuration. Now, list is where you will define predefined values that a user can select from. And the way to do this is actually through using the ARD, which is the second area or the second main area of data editor. We can explore this now, but for now, I'm going to get back to App Builder. And the reason for doing that, just to recap, is because we now have some sort of data model, which we can add to our step. Cool. So how we will type? Wow. Okay. All right. Cool. So, oops, I didn't save it. So let me add an object. Cool. So eventually we will be sending a request, and a very decent way or very good way of categorizing that will be to add it inside an object. So to add an object is very similar to adding a property. You just click on the button and then we just give it a name. So we will call this object request, and then we will save. Now, in order for you to add a property inside an object, you have 2 different options here. You can either add an object, and then you'll see it selected. And this isn't really clear, but if you were to deselect a property or an object inside your model, all you need to do is hit the escape button. And as you can see, we have an outline confirming that it has been deselected. Cool. Now, to resume, I'm going to select the object, and then I'm actually going to apply this property to this object. So as you can see, once I've selected the object, it has automatically nested the property, confirming that this property will be placed inside the request object. Now, I'm actually going to save it this time, so I'll call it my location. And I'll give it a type of a string once I hit save. Now we confirmed it's inside the object by clicking on the arrow to minimize and maximize or expand and collapse the object. All right, so the other way to add to add a property or another object or an array inside an existing object is to drag and drop. So since this one already exists, I can drag it outside as in to remove it, as in to do the opposite. And in order for me to do that, all I need to do is basically click on this. And then if I move it upwards, as you can see, we have a gray curved box appear, confirming that we now have given it the ability on our ADM to move it outside the object. Once I let go, and as you can see here, it's not really clear, but it is outside the object. Cool. So let me move it back in by literally dragging the property to the object and rather than the gray box, just to confirm that it's been placed inside. All right.
Adding a property to an object, right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. Okay, cool. Any questions so far? No? Great. All right, so we are powering through, which is awesome. So the second thing I'm going to do now, so what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to leave data editor because we have at least one object and one property, which means that we can now preview with something. So we'll switch back to App Builder, which is where we build our app. by clicking on the button. And then the first thing that we'll see is the data profile. Now, since we have some sort of data, we can now add it to our profile. And to do that, we click the edit button. Okay, so the first thing that you will see is a new pane open up on the right-hand side with 3 different tabs, which are relevant to what you've seen here. The first box, or the first entry into the accordion, I can call it, will be the ADM library. Since we only have one object and one property, and if we wanted to add this data to our step, and the term adding it to the step is basically assigning the data model to the step. We have the option to do that because we will eventually have a large model where we could choose what type of data or what type of fields to be displayed on the step. So to make more sense, I'm actually going to do that now. I'm going to drag from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. And we always have to drag it inside a dashed line. If I do remove it, well, in order for you to remove it, you just highlight the data and you just exit out. But yeah, if you drag it elsewhere, it wouldn't add, so you do need to drag it inside the dashed line. Cool. All right, so we have my location, which is great. Now, I'm going to hit save, but we have a warning. So another theme throughout Journey Creator, which is great. Sometimes your configuration may not be valid, but thankfully it will hint or it will give you a warning or an error message on what you need to do in order for you to save. I can save it now because not to confuse you, but we do need to add one more thing, which I'll show you why later on. But we'll save it now before adding that thing, which is basically what we have here is data. We have our step, we have our feature, we have our application. So we have a skeleton ready for preview. But if I highlight the warning, what does it say? So it says, this step will not show if it does not have a create or edit link. Now, to make this very easy for you, ignore what you're seeing now, and I'm going to hit save. And the only thing left to do now, since we have a skeleton, I can call it, is to hit preview. And then preview will give you an example of how your application will run. As in your journey will run, not the actual application, but yeah. So the first thing that you have seen already is that once you preview, you will see your features, and it will give you a top level view of your application. If we have more than one feature here, then you'll see it here. So we've called our first feature weather lookup, and then once we click on that, it's done. Now, very quickly or very briefly, it shows and that confirms that there's nothing else to do because, yeah, that's pretty much it. You've only added a step, a feature, and then that's it. Your application's done. Now, to make it more of a realistic application, we need to define an additional, not a step, but an additional thing on our step in order for us to actually see our step. Because if you've noticed, if I reset the journey, we return to the features, which is basically, again, the top level view of your application. Once we hit weather lookup, we don't see our step called lookup weather. But why is that the case? It's because that warning message that we saw earlier is basically hinting us that we do need to add something called a create link or something called an edit link in order for us to view our step. And here is the reason why. So if I move back to the PowerPoint, and then this one's called adding our first create link. So the theme or the term create links is varied. People call it a resource, people call it a link. But the best way to see create and edit links in Journey Creator. So imagine if you had a very large model, as in a data model, and it was empty. And we've now added our application. So we have something inside our model. And we've added our object, which is a request. And then we've also added our property, which is my location. Now, we have a model, which is great, but we haven't given the user the ability to post data towards our model. And in order for us to do that, or the only way to do that, is to give it something called a create link. So for those that are a bit more technical, similar to a REST API, create links are basically post requests. So you will submit data, and then it will post it to App Engine. And again, I may have mentioned App Engine earlier, but App Engine is basically the runtime. And then App Engine will basically validate, based on what you've given it, the ability for the user to create, as in to post new data, or the option for the user to edit, as in to put new data. So that's the best way to see or to explain, also to understand create links and edit links based on my history with the terms. But as a summary, create links are basically an option for the user to create a resource in the data model, and another name or another term will be posting. And edit links allow the user to edit that data that has been posted in the data model. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. But yeah, so we move back to App Builder. We have our second tab here called Integration and Rules. Now, initially, the first thing that you'll see here is 3 different options. So now you should be a bit more familiar with the terms create and edit, but you also have a further option called item. Now, ignore this for now because I haven't personally ever covered this link, and I'm not sure if it will be removed or not. But for now, please ignore the item link. But the most important thing now will be the create link. So in order for us to give this step, or in other terms, give the user the ability to post data using our model, we need to basically click on it once. Okay, so once I clicked on it, as you can see in our integration and rules section, we have a blank create link, which is awesome. So I'm not going to do anything more, but as you can see, before I say, we have an option called precondition, which I'll get into, and we also have an option to add a service. So ignore that for now, and I'm just going to hit save.
To be a dummy.
Sorry?
To be a dummy link.
Yeah, dummy link. So it's actually going to literally just run. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. Cool, so we're back to our application overview, and we have our feature, which is weather lookup, our step, which is look at weather. And now we can see that we have an option to enter our location. Before we didn't have that because we did not have a create link. And that's exactly why we need create links on our step. Cool, so very simple. Now we can add information. And then what you should briefly see here once I hit submit is a label called done. And then whenever you see the done, it's very brief, as in less than a second. If I hit submit now, don't know if you saw that, but if I reset the journey, I'll do it again. Done basically confirms that your journey is done. As in there is no more create links to go through. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'll do it again. Cool. So as a summary, more of a technical description. The way your journey works is your journey will follow every single create link available until it's done. And then once it's done, then it's finished. So there's 5 steps with 5 different, if there are 5 steps and each of those steps have a create link, then it will follow all of those create links until the journey is done.
I have just a question. That in journey, for example, we have next. If we need to, for example, to go to the previous step.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a bit of a complex term because we have to basically work around that at the moment. Previously, one way to replicate going backwards in our journey is not literally going backwards, as in clicking on the button to go back to the previous step. It's actually using the edit link. So for example, if a user was to, so imagine you're logging into an application and the user only has an option to try and enter their password 3 times. So the functionality of going backwards is only if you have an edit link on that step. So your edit link will give the user the ability to not to move forward, as in going back. You can call it going backwards until the submission is valid. If that sounds complex, I'll show you an example later on. But at the moment, for a majority of the cases, the way your journey works is that you'll basically follow every single create link in your journey. And then once all the credits are visited, then your journey is done. Okay, cool. So that's a bit more technical. So let's go back to our preview. Sorry, let's go back to our step. So now that we've seen that we can add our location, let's add 2 more properties. So I'm going to revisit the request object. And to do that, I've selected the object. I'm going to add another property called, what's the time? Okay, called units. But this time, rather than call it, So this time, I'm going to give an option for the user to choose between 2 different types of systems. So between metric and imperial. And as you can see, I'm still selecting a string. It's because this is what I've given the user for validation. So this is matching a schema, which is basically a model. We have to give it a string because we are giving it names. So we use alphanumerical characters. So for example, we're using letters rather than numbers. And this is the reason why we have to still give it the type of a string, even though we are giving it predefined values for the user to choose from. To make more sense, I'm going to do that now. So we'll create a new property, we'll call it units, and then we'll give it a string type. Once we hit save, if I preview now, I'll show you a quick thing actually. As you can see, we've added our new property to our data model, but we haven't actually added it to our step. So when I preview, the only thing you can see now is my location because we didn't add it to our step. So whenever you add new data, please don't forget to add it to your step if required. Otherwise, Journey Creator will not assume that you wanted that data on your step, which makes sense. So we'll edit our step again. Now, let me go backwards. Let me just quickly show you something. All right, now this is a bit of a bug. As you can see here, we have 2 properties inside our request object. But if I go back to our step, and then if I click on edit, what we should have here is access to the new property. But you can only see my location because there is a caching issue at the moment with Journey Creator. So the best way to solve this is by doing a browser refresh. Slightly annoying, but yeah, it's just to clear this error. So I'm actually going to cancel that and I'm going to refresh the browser. So yeah, if you add any new properties or arrays or objects into your data model and you cannot see it for selection when you edit your step, just give your browser a quick refresh and then you should be able to see it. So let's see. Cool. Now we can still search. We don't need to because our model is quite small. But as your model gets larger, we can search our model using this search bar. But yeah, as you can see now, we have our units property, which we just added. Now, a shortcut to adding a new model is to get rid of the entire object because, I mean, well, let me start again. So for example, if you wanted to add your new object as your updated model, you can either get rid of it by removing it and then dragging it to the left. Oops. As you can see, we've added our updated model. But for example, what if we wanted to, oops, did I disconnect there?
No.
Okay. Don't know what happened there. Okay, cool.
I think it's.
Is it fine on your side?
Say that the connection is broken.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the VPN.
Yeah, the connection is breaking.
Ah, okay. All right, I can't see the chat. All right, apologies for that. I think the VPN is temporarily disconnected on me. Can you guys see my screen?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll share my screen again. Cool. Can you see it now?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, apologies for that. So yeah, I have to do a recap now. So as a summary, so where we left off, I know it's very brief, but what we're trying to do now is update our data profile. So since we've added a new property to our data profile, all we can do is literally get rid of it and then drag our updated property. But what if you wanted to drag an individual property on that object? So rather than dragging my location and units, what if you wanted to drag, because there is a model and we could choose, what if you wanted to drag just units? So to do that, all you need to do is a shortcut is remove your existing data on your profile. And then all you need to do is just drag units. As you can see, I've highlighted the property rather than the object. And then it will just drag, or should.
It's part of the object.
Yeah.
Need to grab the object.
Yeah, we could. Or we can drag the individual property and then it will be still assigned to the object.
Okay.
Which is another way of just dragging an individual object. But yeah, so let's resume where we were. So we now have two different properties. I'm going to hit save and then I'm going to hit preview just to recap. So we have our feature, look at weather, which is our step, our location, which is, well, assume it's Sophia. And then we have, all right, so ignore this because it's not really real. But yeah, in the real world, what we should have here is a drop down where the user can select between metric and imperial. This is just auto suggest, so ignore that. But if I was to type in anything else here and hit submit, if you remember, we can check our current journey by checking the state. And this is a very large JSON model, basically. But we can see our submission by looking for our request object. And inside there, we have two properties, and then the two values for my location, or the value for my location will be Sophia, and then the units value I'm not even going to pronounce. But yeah, you guys get the point. So whenever we submit, we can see our submission in our state. Cool. Now, let's add our options for the user to choose inside our units property. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to explore another area called the ARD. Now you can see the ARD as a reference area where you can specify predefined values, which could be organized inside different folders, or could be structured in a table, or basically predefined data where the user can, sorry, predefined values where the user can use to select, which will save the user and future usage of this data a long time. So it's basically a time saver, I could call it. And for this part, I'm actually going to create a new list called units. So what I'm doing here, if I go back, is we have an option to choose between a constant, which is a value that doesn't really change, a folder where we can organize our constants, our lists, and our tables. And we also have an option to create a new table where we can specify structured data that can be accessed in our business rules. Now, I've specified a new term, business rules. I'll get back into that later on, but it's one of the most important parts of Journey Creator. And we'll explore that area next. Cool, so to resume, we'll create a new list and we'll call this list units. Let's give it a description. And one other option here is that we can give it a type. So we can give it a string type, a Boolean type, a number type, an integer type. Now the question here is that why do we have a property? Sorry, let me not confuse you. So I'm actually going to give it a string type because we are using alphanumeric characters. That'll be metric and imperial. Yeah. Now if I go back onto the ADM, not to get confused, if you remember, if I edit our property, I've given this property a string. Now, the question that may arise is that why do we have an option to also give our ARD property a string when we've already defined it as a string inside the ADM? So not to confuse you guys, but the ADM and the ARD is separate. And adding an ARD property to the ADM, which is what I'm going to do now, is optional. So, I mean, you can define a string here. You still don't need to create a list because this will be done after you've created the property. So as a summary, the ADM and the ARD are completely separate models. But in order for us to actually use a dropdown or give the option for a user to choose between different options in our string field, we do need to apply it inside our ADM. And the way to do that is to create a new list in the ARD, which is what we've done already.
For image, if we select an image, does it mean that we need to upload something? Or?
So image at the moment, yeah. So whenever, so this will be I shouldn't say relative.
It depends on the channel. For example, if it's a mobile, for example, a tablet, you need to take a photo. If it's a desktop, you need to upload something. Yeah,
that's true. So it depends on the channel. If it is on a tablet, for example, or retail channel, you can specify the URI on the front end client, and this will render the field as an image rather than a text field. But yeah, that's how we currently use images. Previously, we used something called .cms, which is a content management system, which worked in a different way. But again, this may change because we may be using another content management system called Contentful, which is where we'll be using, or where we'll be managing our content as a summary. But yeah, that's basically the image type. Base64 works in a similar way, but slightly different, and text works in a similar way to image. But yeah, I'll get into that. Maybe not today because, yeah, I mean, there is a lot to cover. But yeah, that's how all the types work. All right, so now that we've created our list, we need to apply it to our property. And in order for us to do that, we just click on Edit, and then we have Validation, if you remember. Now, again, this should really be in another tab because I wouldn't really call this validation. But yeah, I mean, in order for you to add your list to your property, all you need to do is toggle the button. And as you can see, we have our units ARD property referenced here. And then once we select it, we can also search because, I mean, the ARD model, you can call it, will get quite large eventually depending on the application. But yeah, since there's only one property, we just select it. And then once I hit save, what you'll probably imagine is that we now, rather than having a string, as in a text field, we have a drop down. And I'll show you how that looks now. So when I hit preview, and then weather lookup, which is basically our feature, and then we have our step, rather than, well, great example. So at the top, we have my location, which is a regular, sorry, a regular string, as in a regular text field. But now we have a drop down where we can choose between metric and imperial. So that's basically how we add drop downs on our steps. Okay, any questions? No? All right, cool. All right, so since we have more data, I'm gonna add one more property called app ID. Now, I'll say this point is very important because you may need to pay extra attention because I'll be exploring business rules, which is basically rules that we apply to our steps, which allow us to use complex logic or simple logic depending on our needs to make our journeys a bit more dynamic. Now, the first thing I need to do is always start from the ADM. So we add our new property. And since we have the request object selected, I'm going to give it a new name called app ID. Sorry about that. Sorry, yeah. So we're going to give it a type of the string. And if you've probably noticed, how do we actually define a value inside our property without allowing the user to enter that value? Now, I mean, some of you may have that question. Now, the app ID is actually 32 characters long. What we don't want is for the user to constantly enter that value because it will get quite tedious. So what we can use is the ARD. Now, I'll show you an example of how the app ID will look. Well, here is an example. I can either use this, or I can use the app ID, which was associated to me when I created an account with OpenWeatherMap, which would be a lot easier. But yeah, rather than the user entering this 32-digit, I can call it, character every single time they want to start the journey, we can apply this app ID to a constant. So I'm going to switch back to the ARD, and what we have here is our list. Now, before I actually add that constant, I'll show you how we can organize our ARD. We can create a new folder. We can call it weather information. As you can see, I've got an error. And again, this is a popular theme throughout Journey Creator. If your name or your field isn't valid, then your button will turn from black to red, confirming that you have an error. If I try and save, you get a pop-up, and it'll give you, or usually should give you, a description of what you need to do to solve it. But yeah, let me get rid of that, and I'll just remove the space, hit save. Now, similar to the ADM, I think we can just drag and drop here, as in we can drag units inside our weather information folder. So we can drag in there. Great. So we have our organized ARD, which is very simple. Cool, but I'm actually going to create a new constant. So I'll do that now. So similar to your list, you can give it a different type. But this time I'm going to call it app ID. And it'll be a string because we are using alphanumerical characters. The final field will be the value. And I'm actually, let's see if I can access it. Okay, great. Copy. So there's a predefined option here. We are going to save. And great. So now the user doesn't need to enter the app ID. Well, almost. We still need to do one more thing. And in order for us to do that, we need to explore a very important area of using Journey Creator called business rules. Now, edit, integration and rules, create. Now, as a summary, create allows the user to post data. So whenever we add a rule to our create link, we're basically executing our rule once the user has posted the data. Not before. So only once the user has posted the data, our rule will be executed. And in order for us to add our rule, we have a button here called Add Service. So we click on Add Service, and then we have to give it a name. Well, we don't have to. Sorry, we do have to, but it'll be a lot easier again. And then we will call this one use app ID constant. Now, 1 and 2, preconditions. So what are preconditions? So ignore that for now. To make this very easy for you, just ignore preconditions for now. I'll explain why we need to use them later on. But yeah, whenever you add a new service, you have 3 different options. You have an option to do an API call, which is exactly what we'll be doing eventually once we have our integrated services using the integrate section. We have another option called external business rule, where clients or another user can import their own business rules or their own logic to be used inside our steps. And then we have our most popular option, which is a business rule where we can define our own logic using blocks or something called Blockly. If you haven't used Blockly, it's basically a visual tool to build logic. Very easy. Even kids use it. But yeah, so we choose business rule. And then the first option we have here is to add a new rule. Now, I do recommend to name them because we can reference our business rules later on. and we can do that inside data editor. But similar to the service name, I'm going to call it use app ID constant. Now, if you are familiar with this, then you'll probably be at home. But if you aren't familiar, you can see this page as a puzzle builder. On the left-hand side, we have our block groups, and this is all related to logic. And this is how we will build our logic for using our constant. Now, what I'm actually doing now is pretty intermediate advanced, but the most important part here is just exploring how to create a new business rule. So ignore the actual logic, because it may be a bit confusing unless you're pretty technical. But this area will be very useful because it will be used throughout Journey Creator. I mean, for example, apart from using it inside your business rule, you can also use it inside your application flow. So you can give logic to validate or decide where the user will go on a front-end journey, which is great. And we can also use this inside our integrate section as well. So whenever we are mapping data from our input to our output, we can also apply logic as well. And a few other places, but I'm not going to get into that now because we do not have time. But as you can tell, we've been on the call for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we haven't actually, well, I can give a quick indicator. We're only probably 25% through. So there is a lot to go through. But yeah, let's continue. So yeah, so we need to basically use our app ID constant inside our step. And how do we do that? We have different groups here. Now, in order for us to reference anything from the ADM or the ARD, that will be accessible through the group called variables. So we have our first block here called choose property, which is basically a block that we can use to access the ADM. So as you can see, if I choose a property, you can see a dot notation view of how it's accessed in the model. And this pretty much does nothing now, but I'm actually going to add a few more blocks to show you exactly what I can do to build some sort of a puzzle, which will be basically logic that will be used or executed once the user has submitted data. Cool. All right, so I'm actually going to drag, choose an ARD. So let's get rid of that. And we have only one block available on our canvas, which I usually call it. So to remove a block, all you need to do is either drag it to the bin, or you can right click it and then you can either disable it or delete the block. I normally just drag it to the bin because it's a bit more interactive. But yeah, so you can also choose an ARD using this block. Now, when I click on that, we have a similar modal pop-up where we can choose or select from our ARD. And as you can see here, we have units as in the list, and we also have the app ID, which is what we're going to choose. Great, so we can see it referenced. It may not be pretty, but that's how it references the app ID inside our ARD. But yeah, we're not done yet because we're basically saying in the bottom, as you can see, the only thing we're doing here, and also for those that are technical, whenever we use blocks, a copy, you can call it a technical copy, it's also referenced below. If you are happy to code, or if you're comfortable using a language called Groovy, which is what Blockly uses for custom code, you can also switch to code editor, where you can have a full view of coding, as in this will be dependent on your situation here. A majority of users wouldn't need to do this, but if you are comfortable using Groovy code, you can also do this. One important thing is that whenever I switch back to the visual tool, all of your blocks will be removed. So yeah, be careful. Yeah, it's very hard to do the reverse, as in you can use blocks to build logic, but converting logic into blocks will be quite the challenge, which is what they may be exploring now, but I mean, yeah, good luck to them. So I'm actually going to switch back to design editor. Yeah, as you can see, our block has been removed, which is fine. Luckily, we didn't add much here, so we can start again. But yeah, so choose an ARD, app ID. Cool. Now, variables, what we need to do here is use another block called set state. So whenever you want to apply a value to a property, you need to use a set state block. And as I mentioned before, this is basically a puzzle. So if you are unsure what to do next, you can tell by the shape, I basically need to apply this weather information.appid, which is basically our app ID constant. And then we need to define where we want to apply that value to, which is very straightforward. So we choose app ID from our ADM. And then now it makes a bit more sense. We're basically saying we want to set the state of app ID to the value inside the ARD, which is the app ID constant. Now, when the user submits, actually, I'm going to show you. So I'm going to click OK. And as you can see here, we got our success message, which is brief, and we get no errors, which is great. Cool, I'm going to hit save. And then now I'm going to preview. Oh, what do we have here? We have an error. And then what does the error say? All right, so again, usually a majority of these preview, if you don't know what the error is, if you search for preview inside the error, then you see preview. Probably it will be solved by doing a reset journey. If you can't see the button, as in now, the switch between the two tabs, switch back to design and switch back to preview. And then as you can see, we have no more errors. Yeah, it's basically because the preview environment hasn't finished loading. Yeah. Or it's been used, or it's just full capacity. But yeah, just do a refresh and it should be fine. So you don't need to refresh your browser. You can switch tabs and then re-preview again if you can't see the reset journey button. Okay, cool. So we have our feature. And then now, again, I forgot to add our app ID to our data profile. So I'll do that now. But this time, you may assume, why would I need to add our app ID to the profile when I've already applied a rule to set the value, as in the user doesn't need to see that if I've already set the value for the user. So how do we actually hide a field on our step? One way to do that is to apply a hidden value towards it. Now we still need to add it. So as a shortcut, I'll just get rid of what's there already, and then I'll drag the new object. And it should, hopefully, I don't need to do a browser refresh here. Let's give it a few. Nope, not working. All right, great. So I don't need to do a refresh. But yeah, so if I hit save now, and then if I hit preview, weather lookup, look at weather. Yeah, I mean, we did apply the value, but it's still giving the option for the user to post that value. The reason why is because we have a create link. So on the initial assumption, we're allowing the user to post an app ID. Now, since we only apply our rule only once the user has submitted the rule, the step. Sorry, let me start again. So since our rules are only executed once the user has posted data, so for example, if I was to do that, and I enter our location and I hit submit, it's only then, once I hit submit, then the rule will be executed. So our value will not be applied before we hit submit. So in the real world, what we'll normally do in this situation is hide our field, because it's still going to work, as in we still will apply our value to our property, just that the user will not need to see it. So how do we actually hide a field? We edit. And then not to get confused, when I click on this, we have multiple different checkboxes here. And as you can see, we have hidden or disabled, or read-only, mandatory, or default. These all have different purposes. They are all related to HTML. So again, if you're technical, you may be familiar with these. But initially, I got confused. I thought it was hidden. hidden is something else. It's actually disabled. So in order for you to hide your field to the user, rather than selecting hidden, I think it's disabled. So let's try it now. But before I save, I'm actually going to select it. We even have an option to add a rule here as well. So this is where it gets into preconditions, which I'll get back into, but we can also add validation before we actually make this field hidden, which is allowing Journey Creator to be a bit more flexible for a client's different need. So when I cancel, we have an option to make a default, so we can add a default value. We can make it mandatory, which is required. We can make it read-only, which is self-explanatory, so the user can only read this value. We can make it hidden, which is the user, I think the value will not be submitted or something like that. We can make it disabled, where it will be actually visually hidden for the user. We can make it searchable, which is complex. I'm not going to go into that. And we also have 3 different options here. So we have, as you can see, we have preferred group, which is basically saying we can group or order our fields on the front end. So we can give let's say if we had my location and units as one group, and if you wanted units to display on the top, we can give units and my location the same group number. And if units was to be displayed on the top, we can give units the preferred order of 1. And then we can give my location the preferred order of 2. So we can group our fields on the front end. The final option here is very important. It's called a UI hint. We can define UI hints in the settings area. As you can see, we have an example here. So when we select digitize signature, this field will be converted from a regular field into a signature capture box. And this is how we do it through here. But for now, I'm going to make it hidden because we've already predefined the value inside our, So when I hit preview, you shouldn't be able to see it now. Cool. So let me hit save. Then when I preview, we have our feature, which is great. We have our step. My location, London. No, I'll choose it. Let me choose a very cold area. Sorry, a very warm area.
Cairo.
Cairo?
Yeah.
All right, Egypt. Okay, we'll do Cairo, Egypt. Yeah, I wish I was there. And then we choose metric. Did they use metric or imperial?
Imperial.
Imperial. Okay, we choose imperial. And then when I hit submit, well, as you can see, sorry, I forgot. I mean, we cannot see our app ID, which is great because it's actually, But when I hit submit, done. I mean, we didn't actually enter it in our preview, but our rule has executed properly, and we can now see our value that we defined as a constant inside our request object, which is great. We've specified Cairo, Egypt as a location. Nothing has been returned because we haven't actually integrated with the third party, but we are well on our way to doing that, which is great. And we have the units, which is Imperial, which was selected based on a list, which is awesome. Cool. So that's basically an example of how we can use a business rule. Now, let me explore preconditions. Now, this is probably the most important part, or top 3 important parts of using Journey Creator. Preconditions are very important when used with links. And actually, as you can see here, separate to what I've just been talking about, we have a loading icon. Now, whenever you use a Journey Creator, you may see this. This is another bug. If you get this constantly loading, all you need to do is just refresh your browser and it should load properly.
These preconditions, like if condition to execute a business specific.
Yeah. So basically it's validation. If it validates true, then your link is available. So I'll show you a quick example. Now, I've explored create links, but one thing I haven't explored is edit links. So to recap, I'm going to switch back. So edit links allow the user to edit a resource in the data model. And for technical users, I mean, you're basically putting a request. Sending a put request, which will basically update your model. Now, let me do that now. So yeah, whenever I refresh, you do need to select your, oops, what happened there? All right, it's disappeared. Or am I on the wrong screen? Yeah, I'm on the wrong screen, sorry. Okay. Cool, so we have 30 minutes left. Thank you for sticking with me. As you can see, I mean, we haven't finished yet, so we may need an additional session, but I'll summarize that later on. But yeah, so what we need to do now is explore edit links. I mean, we don't need to, but this will be the best time to do that. So we click on edit, and then we have our create link, which is great. What we've added here is a service, which is a business rule, which basically applies a constant to our state. Now, what if the user made a mistake when entering their location? In order for the user to edit that information, we do need to give the step and edit link. So all we need to do, similar to the create link, all we need to do is click on the plus button. And yeah, great. When I hit save, so we don't add a precondition and we don't add a service. So we leave it blank. When we hit save, when we hit preview, we go through the journey again. I'll open up the state in case. We have our feature, we have our step. Now, let's say the validation or the correct submission was Cairo rather than London. So we will enter London and we can choose anything here. But let me reset the journey again. As you can see, we have green, which confirms that we have a create link. But when I hit, or when I submit information, it's been changed to pink. That confirms that we have an edit link available on our step because we've given the option for the user to edit that information. Now, if I click on the link, as you can see, we have our submission that we entered earlier. Now, I can hit submit again, but as you notice, there's no way around it. If I keep on, as in the user will forever be stuck on this place. And the reason why is because App Engine doesn't know when to tell the user how to stop. So you need to basically give instructions for App Engine, as in the runtime environment, or a rule which you can validate against to tell App Engine to stop allowing the user to edit the step. And that's how we use preconditions in a step. Now, without doing that, the user will forever be stuck editing on the step. So we reset the journey, just to recap and do it one more time. London, cool, yeah. All right, so since we've added an edit link, one thing we can now do eventually, or finally, is add a precondition to our link. Cool. So when I click on the checkbox, we have a new rule box pop up. Before I do that, we have an error. Whenever you see this is basically confirming that we haven't finished a step properly. So we've given it a precondition, but we haven't actually added a rule to that precondition. So that's the reason why you've seen this error. In other words, there are form validation issues that we need to fix. So we give it a rule. Now, what you see here is a predefined if statement. And the reason why is because, as a summary, if I go back to the PowerPoint, if I go to the glossary, what does it say? All right, so very, very simple. So, oops, okay, I'm not gonna bother to zoom in. But yeah, preconditions basically determines whether or not a step can be edited or created. So in other words, if your value, it will validate your logic, and if it's true, then your edit or create link will be available. If it's false, then your edit or create link will not be available. In other words, you need to make it false in order for the user to stop editing that step. Now, this way you need to think backwards. So I'll show you an example. So it will always validate to true. So we need to give a rule saying that if the user is not in Cairo, then this link will be available. In other words, if the user doesn't enter Cairo, then they will forever be stuck on this edit link. If the user enters Cairo, then they're done. They're finished. So we'll give it a name. We'll call it user is not in Cairo. Or say Egypt. All right, great. Now we have our predefined if statement. So we have more. So we actually have less blocks here because we only can use certain blocks on a precondition, as in before the user has submitted data. So we can use general information here.
Okay.
Yeah, so we use the logic. So we say if something is equal to something, as in the operator, I think operator, yeah, operator block. And we just fit the puzzle. We just drag the logic block there. But we need to define two more properties there. So if variable, because we do need to access our ADM where the data will be stored, choose property, correct. And then we drag it here, and then we choose our property. My location, so if my location is not, so we choose from the drop down. Of course, we could choose others here depending on the situation, but we choose is not equals to, so one thing we can use is either a local variable. It depends on your rule here. This is a bit more technical, but you can use a local variable in this place. So for example, if you wanted to calculate something before you actually submitted it, you can use something called an item block where you can rename it. You can call it London. You can add your own separate validation somewhere else here, and then once you're done, you can return to this local variable. We don't need to do that now, but that's another option to specify a string. But the easiest way to specify what you need to match is just to use the text group, and then the top block will be the string block, and then we just drag it to fit inside. And then we can say, if my location is not equal to Cairo, then this link, or it should really be edit link, is available. So, okay, as you can see, the error message has been removed, which is great, and then we hit save. Cool. Now when we hit preview, weather look at weather, London, and then we'll check the state, submit. Great. We have our edit link because our validation is not true. Now, yeah, so once we're going to change it to Cairo. As you can see, we have our submission here in our request object. So if I enter this, it will change. I can also specify Cairo, Egypt, metric, still back on the edit link because it's actually, yeah, it needs to be identical. So we will remove Egypt and the comma and the space. We'll do, okay, another thing as well, it's only dependable on where you specify it. So if you have multiple fields with the same information, it's not going to work because you've definitely certified that you want to only validate the my location property. So if you have a drop-down specifying Cairo, it's not going to validate against that. It's only going to validate against what you select, which makes sense. So yeah, now that I've changed it to Cairo, and I hit submit, done. Don't know if you saw that, but it was very brief. No more edit links, no more create links, so we're actually done. So if the user is stuck, one way to get around that is to use edit links. And going back on the topic of how do we go backwards in our journey, we can add validation. And technically you are going backwards because you're not allowing the user to move forward once the user has submitted information. But yeah, at the moment, I don't know if that would change. So yeah, so that's basically how we use edit links and how we use preconditions on those edit links. So earlier I did show you how to make a field hidden. You can also use preconditions on property values as well, and also in other areas of the platform. Cool. All right, any questions so far? No? Okay, great. All right, so we have 20 more minutes, no problem. All right, so now that we have our edit link and our, so actually, as a summary, as a recap, so what we've done is created our project, we created our application, we've added our feature, we've added our step, added an object, we've explored the ADM, the ARD, added a rule, added a precondition. So we're pretty much in a very good position to eventually move on to integrating with an API, which is great, as in ahead of schedule. So to get you a bit excited, I'm actually going to add the final piece before we actually integrate with the API, which will be our response object. So we have a request object and we also have a response object. I'm going to call that object response. And then we'll specify what we want to return. So I'm going to give this object 4 different properties. Again, if you are in the wrong object, to deselect the object, you you press escape and then select the correct object. But yeah, I'm going to give the response object 4 different properties. This will be called, the first one will be humidity. Actually, no. First one will be sunset. And that will be a number because it will be returned as a timestamp. And there's a reason why I'm doing this. So the second one, you've guessed it, will be sunrise, will be another number. Number. Cool. And we would do 2 more. We can do temperature and we can also do humidity. And temperature and humidity will also be numbers based on the example response data. As you can see here, we have
pressure.
Yep, pressure, humidity, temperature, minimum, maximum, all numbers, which is great. Cool. Let me go back. Then I'll add that. String, nope, number, and temperature. All right, so before I actually get to the most interesting part, I'm actually going to show you how to make your labels a bit more prettier on the front end client. So I'm actually going to preview again. Let me preview. I'll show you what I mean. As you can see here, we have HB, as in honeybee. That name will not change probably for a while. But yeah, hb.request.mylocation.label. In the real world, rather than the user seeing that, we can also give it a translation. So we can also rename this predefined dot notation label to something that the user will be more understanding. That will make it a bit more clear for the user to understand. So we can call this one, what is my location? Rather than viewing hb.request.mylocation.label. We can also do the same for units as well. Of course, we've also got app ID on here. We don't need to do that because the user cannot see it. So I'm going to take you to another area of data editor, which is the translations area. So that's the third area that we will explore. So yeah. So how do we actually add translations for different languages or for the same language in different channels or for different reasons? How do we actually change or edit a label? To do that, you need to visit the translations area. And initially what you see here is 2 different options. We've got translations, we've got session mappings. Now, if you're wondering what session mappings is, I'll say don't worry because I don't know what it is. A lot of people do not know what it is and it probably will be removed in the new section. Sorry, new version. So ignore that for now. I don't know what it does. But yeah, the most important thing here is that you do need to add a new translation. Oh, so we have an option to search between a very comprehensive list of languages. For example, I'm going to choose English, and you also have different variants of English, which is amazing. So for now, since I'm based in the UK, I'll just choose English United Kingdom. You can also specify default language. In other words, whenever you preview, it will defaultly, if that's the word, by default, it will display this language rather than another language. So I'll select that for now. But yeah, I mean, in order for you to add your labels or even error messages where you can choose a value, so we can also specify error messages in the same place. What we'll do now is actually rename our properties. So I'll call this one, what is your location? And then Unix will be capital U, and then app ID, we'll just rename it for now. I'll do the rest. Oops. Cool. Now, I can also specify for errors. For example, if I add validation, which I'm going to do next, onto the field, it will show the error message rather than showing the .notation version of that error message. So I'm actually going to leave that now because we haven't added any validation, so I can't really show you the difference. But yeah, if I hit save now, and then if I preview, network, great, 1002. One important thing which I didn't mention, so we also have something called App Engine, which I mentioned before. In order to view what App Engine ID you're using, as in, for example, whenever you log in with a different user, a user may be assigned with a different App Engine ID. So one way of indicating which one you're using without logging in and out is to view the network tab. The network tab basically shows you the different REST API calls between App Engine and your Journey Creator client. So yeah, initially we'll do a GET request, which is basically a request to an initial request to App Engine to return the required information for your journey. Blank request, but you get a response, which is what Journey Creator will use. These are all our models that we will define eventually. Eventually, it will just jumble them all together so you can see a more prettier version of your application. But yeah, that's basically App Engine IDs and how to view exactly which one you're using. But yeah, since we have a translation, I'm going to go through the journey now. Oh, okay. So you're probably wondering why we cannot see our brand new label. This is because we're actually previewing. I mean, in the real world, it will be predefined, as in on a client, the user will just select from a drop down, as in choose a flag, English or Spanish or French, and it will just change the language into that. But for now, since we're using preview, we need to actually manually choose a language. So I'm going to take it to another area which I haven't really explored, which is the settings area in preview. And we have 3 different options here. We have simulate UI client, which is basically simulating how it will look on the UI client, as in on the front end, as in on here. And then we have headers, which is for sending information or metadata, you can call it, as a request. And offline, which is to do with Nectar, I think, but we're not going to go into that now. But yeah, the most important thing here will be simulate UI client. Oh, channels, we can also predefine channels as well. You can specify a channel, retail, phone, tablet, mobile, depending on the situation here. Channels will be added as a value inside your settings area. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm going to choose a master channel for now. The flow is very important in order for you to actually look or even to navigate through this. Without a flow, you wouldn't be able to see this here. So this is the Lumen client. It's an example of custom integration with the material design, which I've been playing around with. There is already a client that has material design and Lumen and a client seed already executed, which is mainly overseen by Stephen Ingram. If you are interested in looking at Lumen, you can have a look at the book. There's a Lumen book as well, which gives you tips and tricks on how to use Lumen, which is also available on GitLab. But yeah, if you search Lumen or UI Toolkit, which is the old name, you can find access towards something which will look like this. Of course, you do need to predefine and have an application flow, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see this anyway. But for now, I'll get back into that later on. But yeah, I'll leave the flow as no flow because we haven't got a flow. And then, yeah, as you can see now, we have our language, which we predefined earlier. Once we select that, and then we click on done, we hit save and restart. Now, rather than seeing hb.request.mylocation, you should see your new label. Yeah, there you go. what is your location, rather than seeing the dot notation version. Cool. So that's basically how you add labels or translations. You can add different translations for multiple different purposes, but of course that depends on your own application. All right, so all right, so since we have 10 minutes, I'm going to show you one more thing, then we need to stop there. Unfortunately, we won't get into adding integration, as we won't do any mappings between our model and the Open Weather Map API, which is probably the most interesting part. Yeah, that's due to time, so I may have to do a follow-up session sometime next week, or I may need to change the schedule a bit depending on how quickly I move on throughout these sessions. But I'll give you more information on that after the session. But yeah, one more thing I'll show you is how to add error messages to our steps. Cool. Now you can probably guess it. You had a look earlier. I'm going to have to revisit translations in Data Editor. And before I do that, actually, I'm going to explore settings. Cool. As you can see here, we have regex, which is basically patterns defined for validation. All right, so we can choose, what can we choose here? Bless you. What can we choose here? So we can choose a very easy regex pattern called uppercase letters and numbers. So rather than adding a new one, I'm actually gonna give, you know what, I'm actually gonna add a new regex just to show you. So a very simple way of defining regex. Normally I use a tool. If you're familiar with regex, you may not need to use it. So I can say, only define a single character between 0 to 9. To do that, I've given it square brackets and I've put 0 to 9 in there. If I wanted to add an additional character, as in a maximum of 2 characters, I could use something called a repeater. Sorry about the cough. A quantifier is the best term, which will match exactly 2 times. And we can also test it. Sorry? Yeah. So if you go to regex101.com, it's a great tool that I use. But yeah, if you are familiar, you don't need to use this. So just to test this, before I actually test it in Beekeeper, I can write our test string. So if I write 1, no match, because we do need to add at least 2 characters based on the quantifier. If I add 2, it's not valid. We see 1 match because we've specified the correct value. If I add another character, still 1 match because it's matched at least once. To make it finish, as in to stop it, all right, I'm going into regex now. We could end it, I think, and we can start it. Yeah, so start, end. Now, it doesn't match because I've given it an ending spot. So if I go back, it still matches. If I add another character, it doesn't match because I've given it more than it needs. Cool. So I'll copy this pattern here. And where is it? All right, so to add new regex, you go into data, which is default, and then you click on regex, add new regex, you can give it a name. Only 2 characters between 0 to 9. Copy the pattern. I'm not sure if we need to add the back and the /, but sorry, the 2 slashes, but we'll just add it anyway. We hit save. And then, yeah, we can choose it. Now I'm going to apply, which doesn't make sense. Sorry?
The error, I think.
Yeah, the error, yeah. So before I show you the error, I'm going to have to apply. Oops.
Validation.
Validation, yeah. We'll click on edit and validation. And regular expression, since we added it to the list, we just choose, and then we choose only 2 characters, hit save, hit preview, and then now we should see an error message if we enter incorrect information. There you go. I've added string letters, and then we've got the error message. If I add 2 numbers, great, no error. Add another number, error, because we haven't matched a pattern. How do we change that to make it more pretty? We do exactly the same thing as what we did with our languages. We go back to translations and edit, error. Yeah, just change it from the drop down, and then we just choose enter numbers only. I know it doesn't make sense for my location, but it's just an example. Cool. Hit save, preview. Yeah, it's predefined it, which is great. Since we selected the default checkbox. London, as you can see now, we have a more prettier error message. Cool. All right, so that's pretty much it. As a summary, I know that initially there was quite a few people on the call. Not everyone could stay, but hopefully you enjoyed it. I think there needs to be another follow-up session, as in probably twice a week, every 2 weeks, because yeah, there is a lot to cover. But any more questions before we finish?
Very clear.
Thank you. No, everyone happy? Yeah. Cool. All right, so this session has been recorded, so you can play it back. Any questions, you can email me or Slack me. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy this. I think if we do have a follow-up session, it will be based on Integrate, Application Flows, Lumen, and Nectar. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed, and see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye.